in the late 2000s, kind of the 2009, 2010, even into 2011, there was this conversation, is Ted Dekker a Christian author? And he would probably at that time have said, no, I'm not a Christian author. I am an author who happens to be Christian. I put those themes into my works, but I am not a Christian author. He had expanded at that time. He was writing books with Hachette, which is a ABA publisher as opposed to a CBA publisher. So he was publishing books that was intended for the secular market. They were still clean. They were still sort of Ted Dekker intense. They were appropriate for a Christian audience, but he was really trying to shy away from that I'm a Christian author, I can only be sold in Christian bookstores, I can only be read in churches kind of thing. As a matter of fact, if you remember his book Adam, they actually released a Christian version and a secular version of that book. And it was very minor edits, and they gave it a different cover, and they called it a Christian Book Distributors exclusive edition for the Christian one. And the normal one, there was just the normal one. And it was this old big thing of Ted was trying to break out of this mold that he kind of created for himself of being the top Christian fiction writer at the time. But in 2001, that was not the case at all. He was the epitome of a Christian author. His early work was very theological in tone. It was very much publicized that way. And his second book was the start of a 2-book series called the Caleb books, because it follows the journey of a boy and a man named Caleb. Blessed Child and a man called Blessed are the 2 books. And he co-wrote those books with Bill Bright, this guy. Bill Bright, who was the founder of the Campus Crusade for Christ. Bill Bright, who preached to as many as, if not more people than Billy Graham throughout his life. And Bright was trying to do something new, do something he hadn't really done before. So he'd preach to a lot of people. He'd focus his ministry on college-age students. And he saw that this was an untapped market for fiction books for this age. And so he's 80 years old at this point. He's nearing the end of his career, and he turns to the hot young new author of the time. So Bright sees an opportunity to do something he's not done before. He's written nonfiction, he's preached at conferences, millions of people have gone to hear him speak, but he's never wrote fiction before. And he had seen Left Behind, he had seen what Tim LaHaye was doing with Jerry Jenkins, just sort of offering guidance and offering maybe partial outline, providing theological input into the story. And that had taken off. That had taken off more than anyone ever saw. And Bright is looking at this saying, hey, I am way more well-known than LaHaye is. If I can write a book, this could be big. And it's hilarious because I'm reading this Times article. This was in Times Magazine in 2001, where they're interviewing Bill Bright about Blessed Child, and he's talking about how it's such a great ministry opportunity that he got to write this book. And oh yeah, by the way, in the last sentence of the article, and they're this book was written with Christian author Ted Dekker. So that's just a sign of where Ted was at in his career. You look at the cover says Bill Bright and Ted Dekker. Now, switch it up a few years later, and you get a man called Blessed, and it's switched by then. Ted has sort of overtaken. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like Barnabas and Saul. That in the early, this is a very niche joke, by the way, so just follow me here on this. In the early chapters of Acts, once Paul is sent out on his missionary journey, he's sent out with Barnabas. And they're sent out, and it's Barnabas and Paul, Barnabas and Paul, Barnabas and Paul. And then there is a shift after a couple of chapters where it becomes Paul and Barnabas, as Paul becomes the primary person of interest in the storyline. And he's the more famous one. It's the same way here. The first time when Blessed Child came out, people are looking at Ted Dekker and they're saying, who? But they're looking at Bill Bright and they're going, we know who that is. We know his brand. We know his story. Yeah, we'll pick it up. By a man called Blessed, then Ted's fame is not, I would say it eclipsed that of Bill Bright, but it definitely gotten to a point where, hey, I am going to show people that I am the one who wrote this book after all. And I tell you, man, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when they pitched to Ted, hey, do you want to write a book with this guy? I don't know how this came about. I wish I knew. This is quite quite the connection. You have Ted Dekker, grew up in Papua New Guinea, surrounded by cannibals, is kind of an emo guy. Yeah, I don't know if he was as much now as he was then. I don't know. But anyway, and then you got him and Bill Bright. It's not really the kind of connection that you would think of. But it works out. It works out in this story quite well. So I won't tell you too much about this story because I just want you to go out and read it for yourself. But it is a story of this boy named Caleb who has the most pure faith of anyone you'll ever meet. He has grown up in this monastery his whole life. He has really missed out on the sinfulness of the world. He has this close relationship with God that he just believes if this will happen, I can make it happen, that God is with me. He has this pure, beautiful faith of a child that gets absolutely, utterly wrecked when soldiers storm the monastery that he lives at. And Caleb ends up in the United States under the care of two different sort of rescue aid workers. And you have to have some sort of suspension of disbelief because there's no way that in reality that these two random people would just be allowed to take this child off to another country and just sort of like, hey, here we go. You're his caretakers now. Good luck with that. And that's part of the storyline as I try to figure out where does Caleb fit in? Where does he supposed to go? Caleb ends up being exploited by several different people. They find out there are things that Caleb knows. It's not really explained how he knows because I think it's supernatural. That he knows something about a political candidate. So they're trying to take him out. They're trying to kill him. They don't know that at first. And also there's this religious intrigue of people who see Caleb's power and his faith. Specifically, he has the ability to heal people, and they want to exploit that for their own gain. So this is a story, at its heart, this is a story about the purity of faith and how really religious powers have taken that faith and just destroyed it and made it into nothing because they try to exploit this power for their own gain. There is a great scene in this novel where Caleb, after he's been going on, basically he's been doing all these tours, going around and healing people. He's been this supernatural miracle worker, and he meets with this evangelical leader who I think is supposed to be Bill Bright, writing himself into this story. And he's old. He has a withered hand. He is not in the best of health. He's in a wheelchair, and everybody expects that Caleb is going to heal him like he has healed so many other people. But they come back from their meeting, and he's still in the wheelchair. He still has the crippled hand, and they are absolutely stunned. Like, did it not work? Is the first thing they want to ask Caleb. Why did you not heal him? He's, this is the guy. Heal him. Go on. Do it. And there's a line that to this day I still quote, and it's whoever said that a straightened hand is more dramatic than a healed heart. That's the core of this story, of seeing that it's not about these outward miraculous signs that show purity of faith, but it's really about that inward sense of faith, of having a heart that is pure. And all the political intrigue that comes around that, to me, is just window dressing. It makes for an excellent story, but the heart of the storyline is this understanding that you cannot exploit God, and you cannot. It really shows the vacuity of so much of our faith. And I wish we had evangelical leaders like the one portrayed in this book today. It's a much different book than you're going to get from all of Ted's later books. You really get a sense in these early books he's writing in order to get published to some extent because some of his darker writings had not been accepted up to this point, but it is just as good. It is just as powerful. This series is one that you're not going to want to miss.